Okay.
But no, I wouldn't say history overwhelms me. Other things overwhelm me, but not history, no. Because I think if you're not careful, history can be a real weight and an anchor around you.
The room did not erupt when the trustees spoke. It became colder. Prince William sat still, his hands locked together, as the final clause attached to Queen Elizabeth's private family instructions was read aloud. This was not a public honor, not a ceremonial gesture, and not a palace announcement crafted for applause. It was something deeper, a final provision reserved only for his children. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William felt the words settle before he fully understood their weight. The trustee's voice remained calm, but every sentence struck hard. The Windsor Children's Provision, a private family arrangement created to protect certain future rights, duties, and traditions for the next generation, had been reserved exclusively for Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, under his guardianship. That meant the Queen had not merely left behind a memory. She had left behind a structure. She had chosen a path for the children before argument, and placed William at the center. Charles heard the same words and did not move. The king kept his face steady, but the silence around him became painful. He loved his son, and he understood why the Queen had trusted William. Yet the truth cut deeply. This final provision did not pass first through the monarch. It moved directly toward the children, toward George, Charlotte, and Louis, as if Elizabeth had looked beyond the crown and placed her final confidence in the family William was raising. The honor was beautiful. It was impossible to ignore. The trustee placed a sealed cream folder on the table, and the sound felt louder than it should have. Inside were Elizabeth's personal instructions, not broad palace language polished for ceremony, but direct words meant to survive her. A royal trust, in plain terms, is a protected arrangement that holds family assets, traditions, or responsibilities for chosen people until the right moment arrives. This one was tied to Windsor education, Balmoral customs, and ceremonial duties the Queen had guarded with devotion. William looked down at the folder and saw not privilege, but proof. She had believed his children could carry something precious. Charles finally lowered his gaze. William finally unlocked his hands. No one rushed to fill the silence, because everyone understood that the Queen's last blessing had created a new emotional center inside the family. Before William could breathe inside that honor, one reaction threatened to turn it into a fracture. And as the folder closes, every eye in the room begins to shift toward the people who now stand closest to Elizabeth's final wish. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis were not in the trustees' chamber, yet their presence filled every corner of it. Their names, spoken one after another, carried the weight of bloodline, memory, and expectation. William did not smile. Catherine did not speak. For them, this was not triumph. It was a burden wrapped in love, passed down by a queen who knew exactly what she was doing. William felt the honor press against him like a hand on his shoulder, steady but impossible to escape. George, Charlotte, and Louis were not simply being named as beneficiaries, not just children attached to a private family arrangement. They were being placed inside Elizabeth's final vision of continuity. The provision meant the Queen had seen something in them beyond age, beyond innocence, beyond the quiet protection usually given to royal children. She had marked them as the living continuation of her private values, and William understood that such trust could never be treated lightly. Catherine sensed the same truth before anyone said it aloud. She knew Elizabeth's decision was not about ceremony alone. It bound the children to service, discretion, restraint, and the emotional discipline that had shaped the monarch for decades. Those traditions were not merely royal habits. They were the hidden rules that held the family together when public applause faded and private pain remained. Catherine quietly placed her hand over William's, and that small gesture carried everything they could not say. This honor was not political, it was parental. It reached into their home, their children, and the future they had tried so hard to protect. William's pride began to mix with fear. He imagined George one day hearing that his great-grandmother had trusted him before he was old enough to understand the cost of trust. He thought of Charlotte, sharp and watchful, carrying a symbolic place inside a family that often turned love into duty. He thought of Louis, still young enough to be shielded from the weight of history, now named inside a provision that would follow him for years. The room felt heavy, because every adult understood what the children could not yet know. Then the trustees revealed Elizabeth's handwritten words. She had described William's children as the safekeeping of tomorrow, and the personal tone stunned the chamber. Charles lowered his eyes, moved by the tenderness, but wounded by its meaning. The provision suggested that his mother had seen the monarchy's emotional future not in the throne itself, but in the next generation William was raising. Yet this tender family moment carried a hidden wound, because the Queen's decision was born from one incident no one inside the palace ever forgot. To understand why Elizabeth made this choice, the story must return to the moment that quietly broke her trust. Long before the trustees opened the sealed file, Elizabeth had already made up her mind. The decision was not born from gossip, rivalry, or palace politics. It began on one quiet Balmoral afternoon, when the Queen watched her great-grandchildren behave with a grace that exposed the adults around them. In that single moment, the future of a private royal provision shifted forever. Elizabeth noticed the change before anyone else did. The Balmoral Children's Tea of August 2021 had been arranged as a family gathering, the kind of private afternoon meant to soften tension and remind everyone of shared blood before public duty returned. Balmoral mattered because it was more than a Scottish residence. It was the place where royal rank often gave way to family memory, where the monarch saw people without the shield of ceremony. That was why the moment cut so deeply. Around the table, a tense exchange passed between adults, and the warmth in the room suddenly thinned. George reacted first. He turned toward Charlotte, who had gone quiet, and comforted her with the instinct of a brother who understood pain before anyone explained it. Charlotte did not make a scene. She held herself still, but Elizabeth saw the hurt land. Then Louis, still too young to understand the full weight of the silence, reached for the Queen's hand. That small act changed everything. Elizabeth looked at the children and saw loyalty without strategy, tenderness without performance, and unity without command. They were not acting like heirs. They were acting like family. William later approached Elizabeth with regret heavy in his voice. He apologized for the tension around the table, but the Queen stopped him with one steady look. She did not need a long explanation. She had watched every movement, every pause, every choice. Catherine felt shaken afterward, not because of one harsh sentence, but because Elizabeth had studied the children as though she were measuring the monarchy's future through them. The princess understood that something had shifted beneath the surface, even if no one dared name it. That evening, Elizabeth asked for her private writing case to be brought to her sitting room. The request seemed ordinary, but aides noticed she remained alone for nearly an hour. The Windsor Children's Provision, the private arrangement later revealed to protect George, Charlotte, and Louis through William's guardianship, began there in spirit, and the first handwritten note tied to it carried that same date. The Balmoral tea had become the emotional trigger behind the final clause. But when the reason behind the provision becomes known, the honor no longer feels gentle. It becomes a direct challenge to others in the family. And that buried afternoon now returns with force, pulling William toward the confrontation he hoped to avoid. The first confrontation did not happen in public. It happened behind a closed door, where polished manners could no longer hide the bruise. Charles stood near the fireplace. William remained by the long table, and Catherine stayed silent until silence became impossible. The Queen's final provision had honored William's children, but it had also exposed a painful question: who truly held Elizabeth's trust at the end? Charles had summoned them because silence was no longer enough. The king wanted clarity, but beneath that need sat something more painful. He wanted reassurance that his mother had not made her final private choice as a judgment against him. William entered carrying the weight of the Balmoral memory, while Catherine came in knowing that her children's names had become the center of a storm they were too young to understand. No aides waited nearby. No secretaries softened the language. No lawyers framed the moment in safe terms. It was only family, and that made every word sharper. Charles asked the question carefully, but it still landed like an accusation. Had William known about the provision before the trustees confirmed it? The prince held his father's gaze, wounded not by the question alone, but by what it suggested. He answered that he had known nothing. He had received the honor the same way Charles had received the shock, in a room where Elizabeth's words were stronger than anyone's reaction. That mattered, because the provision was not a reward William had chased. It was a responsibility placed on him by a grandmother who had already made her choice. Catherine stayed quiet until George, Charlotte, and Louis were spoken of, as if their names belonged to a struggle between adults. Then she broke the silence. Her voice did not rise, but the room changed when she said, Elizabeth's decision could not become a contest of pride. The children were not weapons. They were not proof in an argument. They were the reason the provision existed. William then placed the copied clause on the table, refusing to let the Queen's words be bent into something easier for others to accept. Charles picked up the page. He read the handwritten line again, the one that made the children feel like the safekeeping of tomorrow, and then set it down without speaking. That single gesture carried more force than anger. It showed hurt, recognition, and surrender all at once. The confrontation had exposed the wound, but it also revealed the limit of emotion. The true power did not sit with suspicion, grief, or wounded pride. It sat with the trustees, who controlled how Elizabeth's final provision would be executed. The family argument may shake the walls, but the next battle belongs to the people holding the legal keys. The trustees did not raise their voices. They did not need to. Their authority came from the quiet force of Elizabeth's signature, preserved in ink and witnessed by those trusted to act after her death. In that chamber, William discovered that honor could also be protection. The provision was not a gift placed on display. It was a barrier, built by a queen who feared interference. William understood the shift as soon as the trustees began explaining the terms. The Windsor children's provision could only be administered according to Elizabeth's written instructions, with him acting as guardian until George, Charlotte, and Louis reached maturity. A guardian, in this context, meant the trusted adult responsible for protecting the children's interests until they were old enough to understand them. That detail mattered, because it made William more than a royal figure standing beside a document. It made him the keeper of something Elizabeth had chosen to shield from pressure, pride, and palace negotiation. The trustees then made the separation clear. This provision was not part of public royal duty, meaning it did not depend on ceremonies, titles, or announcements controlled by the crown. It was a private family mechanism, a protected arrangement designed to preserve certain traditions and future rights inside Elizabeth's chosen line. William felt the weight move through him. He was being trusted not only as heir, but as father, not only as the future king, but as protector of 3 children whose names now carried the monarch's final confidence. A senior courtier watched the prince's expression change. Shock gave way to quiet resolve, and that change told the room what words could not. William had realized the provision could not be softened, delayed, or reshaped to please anyone who felt wounded by it. Elizabeth's signature stood like a wall. Charles's hurt could not move it. Palace discomfort could not weaken it. Even family pressure could not turn it into something easier. The Queen had not left a suggestion. She had left an instruction. Then came the line that made the room still. No spouse, advisor, or household figure outside William's direct family line could alter the children's reserved rights. The trustees confirmed it plainly, and the meaning was unmistakable. The provision belonged to George, Charlotte, and Louis, protected through William and Catherine until the right time. A second envelope carried Elizabeth's instruction that the children should only be told when their parents believed they were ready. That detail pierced William more deeply than the legal terms, because it showed the Queen had thought not only of power, but of childhood. The control was now clear, and clarity brought no comfort. It only made the consequences sharper. Once the trustees finished, no one rushed to speak. No one could pretend the decision was flexible. But once control is clarified, the palace begins to feel the first consequences of a decision that cannot be reversed. And when the trustees leave, the silence they leave behind becomes the first sign of fallout. By evening, the palace mood had changed. Doors closed more firmly. Conversations stopped when footsteps approached. What began as a private confirmation now moved through the royal household like a tremor. William was honored, but not everyone felt uplifted. For some, Elizabeth's final provision felt like a blessing. For others, it felt like a verdict delivered from beyond the grave. Charles retreated to his study because he needed distance from the voices that kept repeating the same truth. The king had accepted the trustees' authority, but acceptance did not remove the ache. Staff had already been instructed to prepare a confidential family briefing, a private explanation meant only for the royal household and close relatives. That mattered because the provision could not be allowed to become a public spectacle before the children even understood it. It had to be explained carefully, protected from gossip, and handled with the same restraint Elizabeth had demanded in life. Charles opened the trustees' summary alone and paused at the handwritten phrase that had unsettled everyone: the safekeeping of tomorrow. He read it once, then again, and finally closed his eyes. The words were tender, but they carried judgment. They suggested that Elizabeth had placed the monarchy's most emotional hope inside George, Charlotte, and Louis, not inside the machinery of rule. That truth wounded the king because it reminded him that succession could pass through ceremony, but trust had to be earned in silence. William returned home with a different kind of fear. The prince looked at his children and felt the honor turn sharper. George was still young enough to laugh, without measuring every future consequence. Charlotte still moved through the family with watchful loyalty, sensing tension before anyone named it. Louis still belonged to childhood more than history, yet their names were now attached to a provision that reshaped expectations around them. Their future roles were no longer simply distant possibilities. They were protected under a structure Elizabeth had designed before anyone could interfere. Catherine understood the danger of that weight. She saw the file resting on the kitchen table and quietly removed it before the children entered. The gesture was small, but its meaning was enormous. The adults would carry the secret a little longer. The children would be guarded from the pressure until the right moment arrived. Elsewhere in the palace, a courtier noticed one office asking whether the provision affected future ceremonial access, proving the decision was already moving beyond emotion into practical consequence. The fallout had begun, but it did not roar. It tightened. It changed glances, questions, and loyalties. And while officials tried to contain the meaning, William knew the real burden could not be handled by briefing papers. But the first true shift comes not in a meeting room, but in a private conversation between father and son. Away from trustees, courtiers, and palace machinery, William must now face the one conversation that matters most. There was no crown in the room, no folder on the table, no advisor waiting outside. Only William and George, sitting together in the quiet after dinner. The prince did not reveal every detail, but he chose one truth carefully. He told his son that his great-grandmother had believed in him. And for the first time that day, the honor stopped feeling like pressure and began to feel like love. William had carried the secret all evening, and now he understood that silence could protect a child only for so long. George did not need the full weight of the Windsor children's provision, not yet. He did not need legal terms, trustee language, or the sharp knowledge that adults had already begun measuring his future. But the boy deserved one gentle truth. Elizabeth had left something meaningful for him, for Charlotte, and for Louis. Not because they were perfect, not because they were royal symbols, because she had trusted the bond between them. George listened without interrupting. The young prince tried to hold himself still, as though bravery meant not showing confusion, and William saw it immediately. That small effort pierced him. He softened his voice and told his son that duty was not about being flawless in front of the world. It was about remembering who loved you before anyone expected anything from you. That mattered, because George's life would one day be filled with people judging his every step. But Elizabeth's final gesture had reached him before all that noise. It had come first as love. Catherine remained nearby, close enough to feel the emotion of the conversation, far enough to let father and son carry it alone. She trusted William to choose each word with care, because the wrong sentence could turn comfort into pressure. Her restraint mattered. The children's future had been discussed by trustees, courtiers, and kings, but inside their home, it still belonged to family. Catherine understood that George had to hear this, not as an announcement, but as a memory being handed to him. Then George asked the question that changed the room. Were Charlotte and Louis part of it too? William answered yes, and the words settled gently between them. This was not one child's burden. It was a bond between siblings, a protection shared across the three names Elizabeth had chosen. Later, Catherine found William standing alone in the hallway, emotional but steadier. The provision had finally stopped being only political. It had become personal, intimate, and painfully human. That tenderness could not stay hidden forever. The palace might try to contain the wording, and the family might try to guard the children from pressure, but Elizabeth's final gesture was too powerful to remain only private. That private tenderness soon collides with the outside world, where the public begins shaping Elizabeth's final gesture into a national moment. What was whispered gently inside one family home is about to thunder across Britain. The next morning, Britain woke to a story that felt less like palace administration and more like inheritance of the soul. One newspaper captured it with a stark front page, a black and white photograph of Elizabeth beside a young William, with three small silhouettes beneath the headline, "The Queen's Last Trust." Suddenly, the private provision reserved for his children became a public symbol of continuity. William saw the front page before anyone could soften it for him. He was at breakfast when the paper arrived, and the headline hit with the force of something private being pulled into the open. He turned it face down at once, not out of shame, but protection. George, Charlotte, and Louis were already loved by the public, but love could become pressure when placed beneath a national headline. The palace had released only a restrained statement, confirming that Elizabeth's private family instructions had been honored by trustees, while keeping the deeper terms hidden. That mattered because the children's future could not be allowed to become entertainment before they understood its meaning. Catherine watched William's reaction and understood the danger immediately. Public admiration sounded gentle, but she knew how quickly it could harden into expectation. She insisted the children must remain children before they became symbols, because Elizabeth's provision had been designed to protect them, not expose them. The Queen's final act had carried love, restraint, and private faith. Yet now broadcasters were shaping it into a national moment, connecting her long view to the monarchy's future stability. The story was no longer just inside palace walls. It belonged to the country's emotions. Crowds began gathering outside Windsor Castle, not with anger, but with something quieter and more powerful. People left flowers, notes, and small messages, thanking Elizabeth for protecting the young ones. Windsor Castle mattered because it was not just a royal residence. It was one of the monarchy's oldest homes, and a place tied deeply to Elizabeth's final years. That made the public response feel personal. Many saw the provision as proof that the Queen had looked beyond royal conflict and placed her confidence where innocence still remained. Then one broadcaster gave the story its defining phrase. The provision, he said, was not a transfer of wealth, but a transfer of trust. The words moved quickly across the national conversation because they captured what people already felt. William was honored, but the honor belonged to his children's future. Catherine was cautious, but her caution made the moment more human. Charles remained quiet, and that silence only deepened the meaning. Yet beneath the applause, the final meaning of the moment belongs not to the public, but to the family Elizabeth left behind. And when the noise fades, the monarchy is left with one final truth no headline can soften. In the end, the provision was not about privilege, it was about judgment. Elizabeth had watched her family, measured its wounds, and chosen where her last private confidence should rest. William was honored because his children were trusted. Charles was humbled because his mother's final act looked beyond the crown on his head. And the monarchy was reminded that legacy does not always follow power. William accepted that truth with a seriousness no celebration could soften. The Windsor Children's Provision, a private family arrangement created to protect future rights and responsibilities for George, Charlotte, and Louis, had become something larger inside the family. It was Elizabeth's final act of protection. It mattered because the children were still young, still untouched by the full storm of royal expectation, and the Queen had chosen to guard them before the world could claim them. She had not simply preserved tradition, she had placed a shield around innocence. Catherine understood the meaning with painful clarity. The princess placed the sealed copy inside a private family archive, a protected collection where important family papers were kept away from public handling and careless conversation. She closed the drawer with care, as if the sound itself needed to be gentle. George, Charlotte, and Louis did not need to feel the pressure of those pages yet. Catherine knew that the greatest danger was not the provision itself, but what others might turn it into. Elizabeth had trusted the children's future, but their parents had to protect their childhood. Charles came to terms with the provision in silence, and that silence changed him. The king could have treated the decision as a wound, a sign that his mother had looked past him. Instead, he began to understand it as a reminder. Even monarchs serve a story larger than themselves. The crown on his head gave him authority, but Elizabeth's final confidence revealed something deeper. Trust could not be inherited by title alone. It had to be earned through steadiness, love, and restraint. William saw the honor clearly at last. His tribute to the Queen would not be speeches, ceremonies, or public gestures. It would be raising George, Charlotte, and Louis without crushing them beneath the weight of what she had left behind. The final emotional revelation was unmistakable. Elizabeth's provision was never meant to divide the family. It was meant to preserve the part of it she still believed could endure. This moment honored William, protected his children, humbled the monarchy, and proved that Elizabeth's last private legacy was not control, it was trust. With the provision secured and its meaning finally understood, the royal family is left not with a mystery, but with Elizabeth's final blessing made unmistakably clear. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.